2 years ago, a friendly, well-loved park ranger walked into the wild desert of Big Bend National Park and vanished. Search teams swept the canyons and trails for days, but there were no footprints, no backpack, no broken branches. It was like the earth itself had swallowed him whole. For months, his family waited, praying he'd come walking through their front door, but he never did. Then one day, in the middle of a dry canyon, a hiker stumbled on something chilling: the ranger's service revolver. It was lying in the dust, every single bullet gone. No fingerprints, no footprints, no ranger. That gun left behind one question that still haunts everyone who hears this story. Did he fire it in self-defense? And if he did, who or what was he shooting at? This mystery is darker than you think. And before we dive in, make sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss the ending. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from right now? In Big Bend National Park, there was one face almost every visitor recognized. It was the face of Ranger Daniel Hayes. He had a kind smile, steady eyes, and a voice that made people feel safe. Whether you were a tourist from the city or a local rancher, Daniel treated you like an old friend. Visitors often remembered how he'd wave from his truck as he passed, sometimes stopping just to ask if they needed water or help finding a trail. Kids loved him because he told stories about the park's history, stories that made the canyons and deserts feel alive. There were dozens of small moments that showed who Daniel was. Once, a family from Houston got lost on a back trail. They were scared, tired, and running low on water. Daniel found them just before sunset, gave the kids granola bars from his own pack, and walked them all the way back to safety. Another time, a camper slipped on loose rocks and broke his ankle miles from the nearest road. Daniel carried the man's gear himself and called in a rescue team. Even off duty, he'd help stranded drivers fix flat tires or give them a lift into town. The locals respected him because he didn't just enforce park rules, he cared. He knew the land, the animals, and the people. And in a place as wild and unforgiving as Big Bend, having someone like Daniel around felt like having a guardian. For years, he worked the trails, checked campsites, and greeted visitors. Most people assumed he'd always be there. No one knew that one ordinary morning, Daniel would drive into the park and never be seen again. Daniel wasn't just a park ranger. He was an expert in surviving the desert. He could look at the shape of clouds and tell if a storm was coming. He knew which plants could hold drinkable water and which ones would make you sick. He didn't need a GPS or even a map. Give him a compass, or sometimes nothing at all, and he could find his way through miles of canyons and open land. He knew which trails were safe and which ones could trap you in dangerous terrain. Other rangers joked that Daniel could smell a snake before he saw it. He'd spot tiny changes in the ground: a broken twig, a set of footprints, a disturbed patch of dirt, and know exactly what had passed through. Locals often asked for his advice before going on long hikes. If Daniel told you a trail was unsafe, you didn't question it. If he told you to bring extra water, you brought it. People trusted his word because, in the desert, guessing wrong could mean your life. Daniel had spent years exploring every corner of Big Bend. He climbed its highest ridges, walked its narrowest canyons, and crossed its most isolated valleys. There wasn't a single part of the park he hadn't stepped foot in. Because of that, most people believed nothing in Big Bend could surprise him. He was too experienced, too aware. If something happened to Daniel out there, it wouldn't be because he got lost or made a careless mistake. That belief, that Daniel could handle anything, made what happened next even harder to believe. For Daniel, being a park ranger wasn't just a job. It was the thing he was meant to do. He wore the uniform with pride: the wide-brimmed hat, the badge, the sturdy boots. He loved early mornings in the park. While most people were still asleep, he'd be out checking trails, watching the sunrise light up the cliffs, and listening to the distant call of birds. Some days he'd help scientists track wildlife. Other days, he'd inspect campsites to make sure they were safe and clean. School groups often visited the park, and Daniel was the one who gave safety talks. He kept his language simple, making sure even the youngest kids understood how to stay safe in the desert. He was patient, even with people who ignored the rules. If someone wandered off a marked trail, Daniel didn't yell. He'd explain why the rules were there, that they weren't to ruin fun, but to keep people alive. Colleagues said he was the kind of ranger who made the whole park feel more secure. Visitors left with a good impression because Daniel made them feel welcome. It seemed like he had found his place in the world. He wasn't chasing promotions or planning to leave. This was his life, and he loved it. But one morning, everything changed. Daniel drove out for what should have been a routine patrol in the park's most remote section. He packed light, just enough for a short trip. The weather was clear. No storms, no reason to expect trouble. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. The sun rose over Big Bend like it always did, slow, warm, and golden. The air was still cool, the kind of morning that made the desert feel almost welcoming. In the small ranger station, coffee brewed in the corner. Radios crackled softly with the first check-ins of the day. He walked in wearing his faded green uniform. The fabric was worn at the elbows, the badge dull from years of sun. He smiled at the few rangers already there. "Quiet night?" he asked. They nodded. Nothing unusual. On the desk in front of him sat his day's logbook. His handwriting was neat, steady. "Under patrol area," he wrote. "North Canyon sector." That part of the park was miles from any paved road, a place so remote that even veteran rangers avoided it unless they had to. He didn't pack much. A small canteen of water, a lunch wrapped in wax paper, his service revolver, a pair of binoculars, his truck keys, that was it. Someone joked, "Don't get lost out there." He grinned and said, "I know my way around." As he stepped outside, the sunlight caught the brim of his hat. The desert stretched out before him, endless, silent, and empty. He took a deep breath, slid behind the wheel of his white Ranger truck and turned the key. The engine rumbled to life. Nothing in that moment, not the calm sky, not the quiet station, not the easy smile he wore, hinted that this would be the last time anyone saw him alive. The white truck rolled down the dusty main road, leaving a thin trail of sand in the air. Locals in the small roadside cafe saw it pass. It was heading south, toward the most remote section of the park, a place with no cell service, no houses, no marked trails. A rancher repairing a fence near the park boundary waved as the truck passed. The ranger lifted 2 fingers from the steering wheel in return. That simple, silent gesture would be the last anyone remembered. Not long after, he radioed into the station. The call was short and routine. He confirmed he was checking the far canyon and would report back by late afternoon. The dispatcher noted the time, 10:42 a.m. Hours passed. The sun climbed high, baking the desert floor. Out there, the road narrowed to little more than a dirt path, twisting between sharp cliffs and dry riverbeds. It was the kind of place where a person could vanish in less than a minute. Somewhere along that lonely stretch, the truck disappeared from sight. No more radio calls, no more sightings, just silence. Later, when investigators retraced his route, they found that last known point, a bend in the road where the canyon walls closed in and the trail all but vanished. Beyond that, it was like he'd driven straight off the edge of the map. From a distance, the trail looked like it went on forever, a thin, dusty line cutting through the heart of the desert. The sun sat high, turning the air into a wavering, shimmering haze. The only sound was the crunch of tires over dry earth. The ranger's truck moved slowly, following the winding path between low ridges. Each turn carried him farther from the paved roads, farther from the noise of the main park, and deeper into the kind of silence you could feel in your bones. At one point he stopped, killed the engine, stepped out. His boots sank slightly into the powdery ground as he scanned the horizon, long, steady sweeps like he was looking for something in particular. There was nothing out there. No movement, no sound, just the heat pressing in. After a few minutes, he climbed back in. The truck started again, rumbling forward. On the ridge above, the trail narrowed. It curved to the left and then rose just enough to hide whatever lay beyond. The truck climbed slowly, its tires sending small clouds of dust into the air. For a moment, the shape of it was framed perfectly against the blazing sky. And then it was gone. 1 second it was there, the next, the desert had swallowed it whole. No one knew it then, but that was the last time anyone would lay eyes on the ranger. There were no more radio calls, no more sightings. The trail behind him was quickly erased by the wind. Whatever happened after he crested that ridge happened alone, in a place where even the desert seemed to keep secrets. It was late afternoon when the first red flag appeared. The ranger was supposed to radio in at 3:00 p.m., a routine check that every officer in the park made without fail. But 3:00 came and went silence. At first, nobody panicked. Radios failed all the time out here. The park stretched over hundreds of square miles of mountains, canyons, and flat desert. It wasn't unusual for a signal to drop. Maybe he was in a low canyon or behind a ridge. One of his colleagues, Ranger Lopez, tried again a few minutes later. Still nothing. By 3:30, Lopez called him on his cell phone. No answer. She left a short message. "Hey, it's Lopez, just checking in, call me." An hour later, the sun had dipped lower. The sky turned a deep orange. Lopez tried again, nothing. She drove toward one of his usual patrol routes, scanning the road for his truck. No sign. By 5:00, the ranger station had been notified. The supervisor decided to give it one more hour before sending anyone out. "He probably just got stuck with a flat," the supervisor said. "He'll be back before dark." But 6:00 p.m. came and still no word. The radio stayed quiet. That was when the mood changed. The desert could be beautiful during the day, but at night it turned dangerous. Temperatures could drop 30 degrees in just a few hours. Wild animals came out to hunt, and in some places it was pitch black, no light for miles. By 7:00, every ranger on duty knew something was wrong. They tried his cell phone again. This time it went straight to voicemail. The battery was dead, or the phone had been turned off. Either way, the feeling in the station was the same. Something bad had happened. Lopez and two other rangers decided to retrace his entire shift. They split up, taking different trails and checking all the common pull-off points. They called his name into the wind. No answer. By now, the sun was gone. The last light faded over the mountains, and the desert air grew colder by the minute. The temperature was already below 50 degrees. Lopez checked the river crossing. Nothing. Another ranger scanned the cliffs where he sometimes liked to stop and watch for eagles. Empty. They radioed back to the station. "No sign yet," Lopez reported. That's when the supervisor called in more help. Rangers from other sectors of the park were brought in. Off-duty rangers were woken up and told to grab their gear. The search spread out in all directions. Trucks rolled slowly down dirt roads. Their headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but dust and sagebrush. Someone suggested maybe he'd gone into town without telling anyone, but Lopez shook her head. He would have called. They kept trying his radio, static. They kept trying his phone, voicemail. By 10:00 p.m., the mood shifted again from worry to panic. The desert was now freezing. Rangers pulled on heavy jackets, but they knew that if he was stranded somewhere without shelter, he was in trouble. The supervisor called the county sheriff's office. This was no longer just a late check-in. This was a missing person. The sheriff's office approved an official search and rescue operation for sunrise. But Lopez didn't want to wait. She and two others stayed out through the night, patrolling the trails with spotlights. They found nothing, not even a tire track. By sunrise, the search had exploded in size. Dozens of rangers, deputies, and volunteers gathered at the ranger station. The parking lot was filled with trucks, ATVs, and even a few dirt bikes. A command tent went up. Maps were spread across folding tables. Search teams were assigned to different sectors. Foot teams with dogs started at the trailheads. Drones lifted into the air, scanning the desert for anything that looked like a vehicle. Helicopters from the state police circled overhead, flying low over canyons and dry riverbeds. Lopez joined a team headed toward the far west side of the park. a place so remote that it could take hours to reach. They searched every dirt road, every hidden camp spot, every cliff edge where a truck could have gone over. Nothing. The helicopters reported back, no sign from above. The dogs picked up no scent. The drones came back with hours of footage, nothing but rocks and brush. By noon, the temperature was climbing fast, back into the high 80s. The searchers drank water constantly, but the heat was exhausting. Still, they pushed on. By late afternoon, the reality began to set in. It was like he had vanished into thin air. His truck was gone. He was gone. And there wasn't a single clue to tell them which way he had gone. The sheriff called for the search to continue into the night, bringing in more lights, more drones, and more people. But deep down, Lopez knew something none of them wanted to say out loud. They weren't just searching for a lost ranger anymore. They might be looking for a body. The first day of the search ended the same way it began, with nothing. By sunset, the men on horseback, the helicopters, and the rangers on foot had scoured miles of empty desert. There were no boot prints pressed into the dirt, no tire tracks veering off the faint trail, no torn clothing snagged on mesquite thorns, no discarded food wrappers or gear. It was as if the land itself had erased him. The silence of Big Bend, normally so peaceful, now felt oppressive. Every gust of wind seemed to carry a warning. The canyons, carved over millions of years, stood like stone walls, holding back whatever secrets they contained. The sun baked the ground to a hardness that made footprints vanish almost instantly. The thorny scrub swayed, revealing nothing. Veteran trackers shook their heads. If he passed through here, one said quietly, the deserts covered his trail. Others weren't so sure. The emptiness didn't feel natural. It felt deliberate. By the second day, tempers frayed. Radios crackled with updates that led nowhere. Volunteers dragged their boots through sand and gravel, retracing steps that led only to more barren ground. The official search logs for those early days are shockingly thin, just a few brief notations. Area swept. Negative results. The truth was, without a starting point, Big Bend might as well have been the moon. By the third day, the search turned desperate. His truck was still missing, which meant one of two things. Either he had driven so far into the park no one had reached him yet, or someone else had taken it. The search radius expanded. Teams pushed into arroyos choked with cactus and jagged rock. Helicopters buzzed low over canyon rims, scanning for any glint of metal. Nothing. And then came the whispers. Locals at the small gas station on the edge of town traded theories. Maybe he'd stumbled onto a smuggling route, a wrong place, wrong time scenario that ended quickly and quietly. Others muttered about accidents, a fall from a cliff, a truck lost in a flash flood. Some went darker still, suggesting he had chosen to disappear, starting a new life somewhere far from the desert. The Rangers didn't entertain that last idea for long. Those who knew him said he loved the park too much to walk away from it. If he left, it wasn't by choice. Still, the desert gave up nothing. It held its ground like a stubborn witness. Every canyon, every dry riverbed seemed to whisper, "You won't find him here." By the end of the week, the official search wound down. But for those who had been out there, breathing the dust, scanning the horizon for the shape of a lone ranger, the absence was unbearable. It was as if Big Bend had opened its jaws, swallowed one of its own, and closed them again without a sound. Back at home, the news of his disappearance hits like a freight train. His wife sits at the kitchen table, a phone beside her, hands wrapped around a coffee cup gone cold hours ago. She keeps glancing at the clock. Every time it ticks forward, the house feels a little quieter. The kids, too young to fully understand, keep asking when Dad is coming home. She answers softly, telling them he's just working late. But deep down, she's already feeling a knot of fear she can't untangle. The first night without him stretches on endlessly. The silence is loud, no sound of boots by the door, no key turning in the lock. Outside, the crickets sing like nothing's wrong, but inside, every creak in the house makes her heart race. When the phone finally rings at midnight, she snatches it up before the second ring. But it's not him. It's the park service, no news yet. The line clicks off, leaving her with the hum of the dial tone. She doesn't sleep. She just sits by the window, staring at the empty driveway, waiting for headlights that never come. 2 weeks pass. The official search winds down, resources pulled away to other emergencies. To the Park Service, it's a cold trail now, but to his family, it's not over. They print flyers with his face and tack them to telephone poles, gas station windows, and fence posts along dusty highways. Every stranger becomes a possible witness. Every rumor is worth chasing. But with each day, the leads grow thinner. Some locals say maybe he slipped and fell into one of the park's deep ravines. Others whisper about drug smugglers in the remote canyons. A few mention stranger things, old legends about spirits that haunt Big Bend. His wife tries to keep the hope alive, but at night she stares at the empty side of the bed, the smell of his aftershave fading from the sheets. She tells herself he's still out there, that he'll walk through the door any day now. But the truth is, the silence is starting to feel permanent. It had been 30 days since Ranger David Cole vanished. The search teams were gone now. The helicopters that once circled above had been grounded. Volunteers stopped showing up. Even the posters on the visitor center walls were curling at the edges from the heat. At first, the park had been full of noise, radios crackling, boots crunching in the dirt, trucks roaring up trails. Now silence. Big Bend felt empty. The other rangers tried to keep working. They gave tour, checked campsites, patrolled the roads, but everyone could feel the shadow of David's disappearance. Tourists asked fewer questions. Some skipped hikes altogether. Every day that passed made the chance of finding him smaller. People whispered the same thing. If he was out there alive, they would have found him by now. The official search ended after 2 weeks, but the case stayed open. Investigators still followed leads, but nothing solid came in. Most were false sightings. A man in a nearby town who looked like David. A dusty truck on a ranch road that turned out to be nothing. By the 30th day, even the media had stopped calling. Then quietly, something shifted. A new tip came in, this one from someone inside the park. It wasn't about David directly, but about a place. A maintenance worker told investigators about a section of Big Bend that hardly anyone ever visited. No official trails, no signs, just a narrow dirt road that disappeared into desert hills. It was the kind of place David might have gone if he didn't want to be found. The tip was enough for the sheriff's office to take another look. Within hours, they were back in the park. But this time, they weren't searching everywhere. They were going straight to one spot. The next morning, word spread fast. Big Bend National Park was shutting down. It wasn't fire season. There wasn't a storm coming. But by 10 a.m., rangers were stopping cars at the entrance and turning people away. No more visitors today, they told confused tourists. Roadblocks went up at the main highways leading in. Patrol trucks rolled down the dirt roads, making sure no one slipped through. By noon, helicopters were back in the air. From the outside, no one knew why. There was no press release, no updates on the park's website, just sudden heavy security. Locals who lived near the park had their own theories. Some thought they found David's body. Others guessed a fugitive was hiding inside. Inside the park, only a handful of people knew the truth. Investigators had received the tip about the remote road, and they were moving fast before anyone else could get there. Dozens of law enforcement vehicles, sheriff's trucks, unmarked SUVs, and Park Service units formed a convoy. They pushed deep into Big Bend, following winding roads into country most tourists never see. The desert stretched for miles in every direction. No cell service, no towns, just dirt, rock, and sun. Hours passed before the convoy slowed. Up ahead, the road narrowed into a single track, barely wide enough for one vehicle. This was the spot the maintenance worker had described. The lead SUV stopped. Everyone got out. They split into teams, some moved on foot, others stayed in vehicles. The helicopters above circled tighter, hovering low enough to kick up dust. The air felt heavy. For 30 days, David's trail had been cold. Now, everyone here believed they were close to something. They just didn't know what. The road ended in a patch of hard-packed dirt, and there, tucked against a low ridge, was a dusty white pickup truck, the same make and model David drove. The first thing they noticed, the doors were closed, the windows rolled up. The second, the keys were still in the ignition. Investigators circled the vehicle slowly, eyes scanning the ground for footprints, tire marks, anything that might explain how it got here. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken glass, no dents or scratches. It looked like it had been parked there on purpose. Dust covered every surface, but the inside was neat. His ranger hat was on the passenger seat. A half-empty water bottle sat in the cup holder. One of the deputies tried the driver's door. It was unlocked. Inside, the odometer showed the same mileage from the last maintenance check. The radio was off. The air smelled like sun-baked plastic. It was as if David had just stepped out for a moment and never came back. Search teams fanned out from the truck in every direction. Some climbed the ridge to get a better view. Others combed the dry washes nearby. They found no footprints, no drag marks, no signs of a struggle. The only thing they could agree on was this: the truck had been here for a while. How long, no one could say. By sunset, the area was roped off with crime scene tape. Floodlights lit up the truck as investigators photographed every inch. They collected fingerprints. They bagged the water bottle. They checked the GPS for recent locations, but there was nothing unusual. It was a major break in the case, the first real clue in a month. But it also raised a chilling question. If the truck had been here the whole time, why hadn't they found it before? And where was Ranger David Cole? The inside of the Ranger's truck looked like a frozen moment in time. On the passenger seat sat his backpack, unzipped, yet perfectly neat. Inside, searchers found his lunch still wrapped, his water bottle still full, his maps and notepads stacked exactly as he'd left them. Even his wallet with cash and ID was tucked inside. Nothing was stolen, nothing looked rushed. The keys were still in the ignition like he'd only stepped away for a moment, but no footprints led away from the truck, no signs of a struggle, no torn clothing. For a park ranger, the backpack was more than just gear, it was his lifeline. In the desert, you don't wander far without water or a map. So why would he leave it? Why would he leave everything? Searchers looked at the open driver's door and imagined him stepping out, maybe to check something nearby. But the truck was parked far from any trail, deep in the kind of desert where even seasoned hikers hesitate to go. The untouched backpack told investigators something chilling. Whatever took him from this spot happened fast. By the third day, the theory of a simple mishap began to fade. There were no signs of an animal attack. No blood, no shredded fabric, no drag marks in the sand. The weather had been calm, no flash floods, no sudden sandstorms. And the truck, it was in perfect working order. Full tank, no mechanical problems. This wasn't a case of breaking down in the middle of nowhere. Investigators started to treat the scene like a potential crime. They went over the truck inch by inch, dusting for prints, photographing every detail. But all they found was nothing. His own fingerprints, his family's, no strangers. The location itself made no sense. He hadn't signed in at any ranger outpost for work that day. He hadn't told his family he was heading to this part of Big Bend. It was as if he'd gone off the grid on purpose or been lured there. Rumors began to swirl in the nearby towns. Some whispered about drug runners who sometimes passed through the desert at night. Others spoke about old smuggling trails that even the maps didn't mark anymore. Whatever happened, investigators knew one thing: people don't just vanish in broad daylight, leaving their truck and lifeline gear untouched. This wasn't an accident. The search team combs through every scrap of official communication from that day: handwritten notes, dispatch logs, and radio transcripts. Buried in the stack, they find it: his final transmission. It's short, routine, almost boring. A calm check-in, given in the same professional tone he'd used 1,000 times before. No distress, no urgency, just another line in the day's log. But something sticks out: the location. He made the call from a stretch of the park rangers quietly called the Basin. To tourists, it's just open desert. But to those who patrol it, it's a place with a reputation and not a good one. Over the years, odd things have happened there. Strange lights flickering just above the horizon. Distant engine sounds in the middle of the night when no vehicles were around. Even the occasional traveler who swore they'd seen people moving in the darkness, only for the area to be completely empty minutes later. Normally, a call like his would have been followed up. Another ranger would have checked in within the hour. But that day, for reasons no one can quite pin down, there was no follow-up. That was it, one calm, unremarkable call, then silence. And now, with him gone, that patch of desert, and whatever he saw before making that call, becomes the focus of the investigation. As agents dig deeper, they find something else that raises eyebrows. Days before he vanished, he had logged a strange incident, one he never got the chance to file in detail. According to the initial note, it was a possible illegal activity spotted deep in the backcountry. He described seeing faint lights where no campers were authorized. And not just lights, moving vehicles. This was impossible. The area was miles from the nearest road, with no trails capable of supporting cars or trucks. Yet he'd been clear. He saw headlights weaving slowly in the distance, then stopping all at once. The strangest part, he hadn't gone in to check immediately. Instead, he wrote that he'd circle back later. But there's no follow-up report, no additional notes. Witnesses now step forward, telling the FBI they'd overheard him talking about something not right out there. Some say he mentioned unmarked SUVs. Others claim he joked, uncomfortably, about the kind of people you don't want to meet in the middle of nowhere. Whether it was smugglers, trespassers, or something far stranger, no one knows. But it's now clear. Whatever he stumbled onto in those final days, it may not have been an accident at all. After weeks of searching, the official teams finally stop. The Park Service says they've covered every trail, every canyon, and every water hole they could reach. They call the effort exhaustive. For the family, it feels like a door slamming shut. The final press conference is short. An officer thanks the public for tips and says they'll keep the case open but inactive. In plain words, they're not looking anymore unless something new comes up. For his wife, that's not good enough. She keeps calling the park office, sometimes every day. She asks if maybe they could send a helicopter over one more time. Maybe they could bring in new search dogs. Maybe there's a cave they missed. Most of the time, the person on the other end of the line just says, "We're sorry, ma'am. There's nothing more we can do." But she doesn't stop. Every week she writes a letter to the park superintendent. She prints out maps and circles areas she thinks weren't searched enough. She sends them in, even though she never gets a reply. Friends try to tell her to rest, to focus on her kids. She nods but keeps working on her own plan, lists of possible places, names of hikers who were in the area that day. She even starts calling small-town newspapers, hoping a local hunter or rancher might have seen something. Her daughter tells her one night, "Mom, maybe he's still out there waiting for us to find him." She holds her close and says, "That's why we can't stop looking." The official search might be over, but for his family, it hasn't even begun. 2 years is a long time. 2 birthdays come and go without him. 2 Christmas mornings with his chair at the table sitting empty. Every holiday feels strange. They still hang his stocking, still put his name on a gift tag just in case. They try to celebrate like normal, but there's always that question in the room. Is he alive? Or is he gone? Without a body, they can't hold a funeral. Without proof, they can't let go. They're stuck in the middle, not fully grieving, not fully moving on. His son refuses to box up his things. His boots stay by the door. His hat still hangs on the hook. The family says it makes the house feel less empty. The wife keeps his phone number active, even though the bill is high. She tells friends, "If he gets the chance to call, I want him to hear my voice on the other end." The neighbors stop asking for updates after the first year. People have lives to live, and the case is old news. But for the family, it's not a past event. It's happening right now, every single day. Some nights the wife dreams she hears his truck pull into the driveway. She gets up, looks out the window, but there's nothing there. They keep hopping for a call, a sighting, a clue, anything. Until then, they live in the in-between, waiting, wondering, not knowing. 2 years is enough time for the desert to take back everything. The tire tracks his truck left are gone. The markers from search teams, little orange flags, strips of tape tied to bushes, are shredded or buried under sand. The wind has worked over every rock, every dune, smoothing them back to the way they were before. It's like he never set foot there. Tourists hike the trails now, snapping photos of the cliffs and canyons. They have no idea a man disappeared here. The rangers still remember. A few say they think about it every time they drive past that dusty trail. But even they admit the land doesn't keep many secrets in plain sight. The heat, the sand, the storms, all of it works together to erase clues. Bones, clothing, tire ruts, if they were there, nature has hidden them well. The wife visits the park once on the 2-year mark. She drives the same route the search teams once followed. She stops at the last place anyone saw him. She stands there for a long time, looking out over the endless desert. The silence is so complete it feels like a wall. In the end, she gets back in her car and drives away. The trail behind her swallows her tracks just as quickly as it once swallowed his. With no new evidence, the case began to rot in the dark corners of speculation. Every diner in town had its own version of what really happened to the ranger. Some swore he had staged the whole thing, a calculated escape from a job that had worn him down. Others whispered he'd been silenced for digging into something he shouldn't have. The story twisted and grew with each telling, picking up new details that no one could verify. One man claimed he'd seen black SUVs parked deep in the desert days before the disappearance. Another insisted he'd overheard a late-night argument between the ranger and a stranger at a gas station. And then there were the more bizarre theories: alien abductions, secret government experiments, portals hidden in the canyons. Each rumor added another layer to the fog surrounding the truth. The ranger's family tried to ignore the noise, but it was impossible. Every time they walked into a store or sat down for coffee, they could feel the stares. The case was no longer just about a missing man. It had become a local legend. And legends are rarely interested in the facts. In the end, the official investigation stalled. Without leads, the trail had gone cold. What remained was a vacuum and the human instinct to fill it with stories. The truth, whatever it was, slipped further away with every passing month, buried under a growing pile of speculation. 2 years later, on a cool spring morning, a lone hiker set out to explore the canyons far from the park's marked trails. He wasn't looking for trouble, just solitude. The air was crisp, and the desert floor glowed gold under the rising sun. For hours he followed a faint game path, winding between scrub brush and red rock walls. But at some point, without realizing it, he veered off. The trail he thought he was following had vanished. Now he was moving through terrain that few had ever crossed. The silence was heavy here. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of his boots on gravel. The canyon walls grew steeper, funneling him toward a shadowy bend. Something about the place felt untouched, like time had skipped over it. He stopped to sip from his water bottle and check his bearings. That's when he noticed it, a pale shape in the distance, half hidden in the shade of the rocks. Something man-made. The canyon was silent except for the hiker's boots crunching against gravel. He'd been following what he thought was a trail, but the path had dissolved into scattered rock and sand hours ago. The sun bore down, baking the landscape into shimmering waves. That's when something caught his eye, a faint metallic glint just ahead. At first, he thought it was a soda can or maybe an old piece of camping gear. But the shine was too sharp, too deliberate. He knelt, brushing away the top layer of sand with his fingers. The more he uncovered, the colder he felt. Slowly, the outline became clear, a revolver, half swallowed by the desert. It looked old, the metal dulled and pitted, the grip worn smooth. But it wasn't the kind of thing you just stumbled across out here. For a moment, he thought about leaving it. Something about it felt wrong, like it was resting exactly where it had been placed, waiting to be found. But curiosity got the better of him. He pulled it free, shaking off sand. The weapon was heavy, real, and as he turned it over, faint markings came into view, letters and numbers etched into the frame. That's when he realized this wasn't just any gun, this was someone's. Someone important. When the hiker handed the weapon to authorities, they wasted no time. The serial number was still faintly visible, and a quick check confirmed it. The revolver belonged to the park ranger who had vanished 2 years earlier. The find was shocking enough, but one detail made it even stranger. The revolver's cylinder was empty. All 6 chambers had been fired. There were no shell casings recovered at the site, no footprints, no scraps of fabric or broken gear, nothing to suggest a struggle, a camp, or even that anyone had been there since the weapon was abandoned. The desert was good at erasing things, but this felt intentional, as if someone had cleaned the scene before leaving. Investigators tried to map out possible scenarios. If he'd fired all 6 rounds, who or what had been on the receiving end? Why had no one reported hearing shots? And if the gun had been his last defense, where was the rest of him? Theories began forming instantly. Some believed he'd fought off an attack, maybe from poachers or cartel members using the park as a route. Others thought the shots had been a signal for help that never came. But the revolver's location complicated things. It was miles from where he was last seen, in a place no official search teams had covered. One thing was certain, the discovery wasn't an answer, it was a question, a louder, sharper one than before. 2 days after the revolver was found, the FBI rolled back into Big Bend. This time, there was no quiet arrival. Black SUVs and marked Ranger trucks lined the dusty road leading to the canyon. The place was swarming. Agents in plain clothes moved with purpose, while uniformed park rangers formed a tight perimeter. Yellow crime scene tape was strung between rocks, blocking any hikers or curious locals from getting close. The canyon, usually silent except for wind and birds, now echoed with the hum of generators, the crackle of radios, and the heavy steps of boots on gravel. The gun had changed everything. It was the first real piece of evidence in nearly 2 years. And it wasn't just lying out in the open. It had been hidden deep in the gully, where no casual hiker would ever wander. FBI tech teams in gloves carefully photographed the weapon's position before removing it. Another team combed the surrounding area inch by inch, using metal detectors and digging small test holes. A local reporter tried to approach, but was stopped at the tape. No comment, an agent said, waving them back. The desert heat beat down on the scene, but no one slowed. They knew they were standing in the exact place where someone, possibly the missing ranger himself, had last handled that gun. And if that was true, then maybe the answers weren't buried in old case files. They were right here, somewhere in this canyon. Back at the FBI lab, the revolver sat under bright forensic lights. A technician lifted it gently from an evidence bag, placing it on a stainless steel table. They started with standard fingerprint dusting, fine black powder brushed carefully over the metal. Under a magnifying glass, they looked for even the faintest ridges of skin. Nothing. They tried again, this time using a special chemical fuming process that could reveal older, hidden prints. Still nothing. The lab chief frowned. No latent prints at all. The technician shook her head. It's clean, too clean. By clean, she didn't mean new. The revolver was weathered. Sun and sand had dulled the metal. The leather grip showed cracks from years of heat. But in all that time, not one fingerprint had survived. Not from the missing ranger, not from anyone else. It was as if someone had deliberately wiped it down before hiding it. The agents knew what that meant. This wasn't just a forgotten gun lost in the wilderness. Someone had touched it after the ranger vanished. Someone who didn't want to be identified. The lead FBI agent stared at the report in silence. The revolver had been out here all along, in a place so remote it could have stayed hidden forever. But someone had gone to the trouble of cleaning it and leaving it where it was eventually found. That left only 2 possibilities. The missing ranger had done it himself, or the person who made him disappear had. While forensics worked on prints, another team ran the gun's serial number through federal law enforcement databases. The number came back fast. It matched the service revolver issued to Ranger Daniel Holt in 1999, the very same weapon logged as missing from the day he disappeared. For nearly 2 years, that revolver had been a ghost in the investigation. They had searched his truck, his cabin, his storage locker, but it was never there. And now it was in FBI custody. Park rangers who had worked with Holt were called in. Each confirmed what the serial number already proved. It was his. The scuffed metal near the barrel, the worn leather grip, even the faint scratches on the cylinder, they recognized it instantly. The discovery was huge. It was the first concrete link between Holt and the canyon where the revolver was found. But it also raised disturbing questions. If the gun had been there since the day he vanished, why hadn't search teams found it back then? And if it hadn't, who put it there later? The FBI knew one thing. Finding that revolver was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a much darker chapter. The revolver lay in an evidence bag on the table, its metal dulled by years in the desert. Lab techs handled it like a relic from another time. Ballistics tests came back quickly. All 6 chambers had been fired. Whoever had last held it had emptied it completely. But the mystery wasn't in the firing. It was in what was missing. At the canyon site, investigators had combed every inch of sand and rock. No shell casings, no bullet fragments, no marks on stone or bone to suggest where those rounds had landed. It was as if the shots had been fired into nothing, or into something that left no trace at all. The canyon where the gun was found wasn't just remote, it was nearly inaccessible. The hiker who stumbled on it had wandered off a faint trail, down a dry wash, and into a dead-end pocket of rock that didn't lead anywhere. From where the ranger's truck had been abandoned, this spot was miles away. Not just miles, miles of blistering sun, jagged rock, and stretches where you'd have to crawl on your hands and knees. No one ends up here by accident, not without a reason. Theories began to shift. Maybe he had been chased. Maybe he'd been taken here. Or maybe this place had been chosen deliberately for reasons no one yet understood. Whatever the case, the empty revolver's presence here didn't just deepen the mystery. It made the story feel less like a disappearance and more like a final stand. Investigators gather around the small evidence table. In the center, the revolver rests, worn metal dulled by years of desert air. 6 chambers, all empty. Whoever fired it did so deliberately. Theories spill across the room. Maybe he'd stumbled into a pack of aggressive animals. But in this part of the desert, nothing that size roams without leaving tracks. There were none. Others suggest an ambush. But why lure a park ranger so far from his truck? And if it was an attack, where were the bodies, the blood, the sign of a struggle? One agent proposes the shots were warnings, fired into the air to scare something or someone off. Yet without shell casings or bullet fragments, even that simple theory feels flimsy. The gun says he fired. The desert says nothing else happened. Both can't be true. The serial number confirms it. This was his service revolver, the last thing he might have held before vanishing. But beyond that, the weapon is silent. No fingerprints survive. No traces of blood, skin, or dirt that might tell where it's been. Even the wear on the grip is ordinary, no different than the day he received it. Every investigator wants the same thing, for the gun to speak, to fill in the 8 missing years between his disappearance and its discovery in the sand. Instead, it gives nothing. The revolver becomes a symbol in the case file, the only tangible piece of him recovered, yet utterly useless. It raises questions no one can answer, questions that seem to twist back on themselves. If he fired 6 times, who or what was on the other side? And if he made it this far into the canyon, why didn't he come back? 2 years after the search ended, the case had gone cold. Then, out of nowhere, a retired park ranger named Bill Larson called the lead investigator. His voice was low and uneasy. He said there was something he should have told them earlier, but didn't. Larson explained he had worked with the missing ranger for over a decade. They weren't just co-workers, they were friends. A week before the disappearance, they met for coffee at a small diner outside the park. That's when the ranger leaned in and told him something he'd never repeated to anyone. At the time, Larson thought it was just a theory, but now it felt like the missing piece. He admitted he didn't come forward earlier because he didn't want to smear his friend's name with rumors. But after 2 years and no answers, his guilt had become unbearable. The investigator pressed him. "What did the ranger say?" Larson hesitated, his voice cracking. "He told me," Larson said, "that he thought something was going on out there, something dangerous. He didn't give me names, but he said if anything happened to him, it wouldn't be an accident." The room went silent. The retired ranger explained that his friend had been unusually tense in the weeks before he vanished. He was checking certain areas of the park more often than his regular patrol required, and he kept a map with handwritten notes and circles, one of them drawn in red ink, around a remote canyon few visitors ever saw. Larson had thought it was just a hunch, maybe paranoia. But now, with the man missing and his gun found in that same area, it no longer felt like coincidence. Larson finally told the full story. The week before the disappearance, the missing ranger had come to him in private. He believed an old smuggling route had been reopened deep inside the park, a path used decades ago to move contraband across the border. It wasn't marked on modern maps, but the ranger had stumbled on signs of it during patrol. Fresh tire tracks on a dirt road that should have been abandoned, boot prints in dry creek beds, and empty water jugs hidden under rocks. He suspected it was being used again, not just by small-time opportunists, but by organized groups. The route's entrance was nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. Once inside, it wound through canyons, past sheer cliffs, and into a basin where cell service was non-existent. Larson said his friend was worried, but also determined. "If this thing is back," the ranger told him, "it could explain a lot of the weird reports we've been getting." The week he vanished, the ranger planned to hike into the canyon alone, off-duty, to confirm his suspicions. He didn't tell his supervisor. He didn't want to set off alarms until he was sure. The investigator now realized this was the same canyon where the Coast Guard later found the ranger's service revolver. That couldn't be chance. Larson's voice dropped. "He told me if he found proof, he'd report it right away. But he also said if I didn't hear from him after that, I should assume the worst." The investigator's stomach turned. This wasn't just a missing person case anymore. It was beginning to look like the ranger had walked straight into something dangerous and possibly criminal. Investigators pulled old park maps from storage, looking for the route Larson described. On one faded sheet from the 1970s, they found it, a thin dotted line weaving through a series of remote canyons. The trail began miles from the nearest paved road. It crossed over blind ridges, where anyone following could be spotted from far away. Then it dipped into a narrow pass barely wide enough for a single vehicle. From there, it disappeared into a maze of sandstone cliffs before ending near the canyon basin. The area was perfect for illegal crossings. There were countless hiding spots, overhangs, caves, and dry riverbeds. It was also nearly impossible to patrol regularly. Even today, reaching some parts required days on foot. One investigator traced the route with his finger, stopping at the exact canyon where the revolver had been found. It matched perfectly with the red circle the retired ranger described. They also realized something chilling. If someone wanted to make a person disappear out there, they wouldn't need to hide them far. The landscape itself would do the job, swallowing evidence, erasing tracks, and keeping secrets for decades. Satellite images showed faint marks along the old path, like scars in the earth. Were they from hikers or something else? The team agreed they had to go there themselves, but they also knew it wouldn't be easy. The heat, the terrain, and the possibility of encountering whoever was using the trail made it risky. Still, the canyon had already claimed one man. They needed to know why. Detectives fan out to the remote cluster of homes scattered along the park's edge. Most are old ranches, weathered porches, wind-bent fences, and residents who know every sound the desert makes. When asked about the week the ranger vanished, the locals leaned back in their chairs, squinting into the heat haze, trying to recall. One woman remembers seeing faint lights drifting across the desert floor late at night, not headlights, but something smaller, bobbing in the darkness. She assumed it was campers. Another man swears he heard the rumble of engines somewhere deep in the canyons. The sound carried strangely in the still air, stopping and starting in uneven bursts, like whoever it was didn't want to be followed. A younger ranch hand recalls a brief but intense glow like a flare flashing far off in the distance. It was gone in seconds, swallowed by the black sky. Each account is different, but together, they paint a picture of unusual movement in a place where nothing should be moving at night. And for the first time, investigators begin to wonder if the ranger's disappearance wasn't an accident at all, but the result of someone else being out there, too. One rancher, a wiry man with sun-leathered skin, hesitates before telling his story. The night the ranger vanished, he was sitting on his porch, the desert air cool and still. Sometime after midnight, he heard it, sharp cracks echoing through the canyon walls. Gunshots more than one. At first he counted 3 spaced apart, then a pause, then another burst too quick, one slow. The sound rolled through the night, fading into silence. He remembers thinking it was just hunters ignoring park rules, something he'd heard before. But now, with the ranger gone and his revolver found empty, the memory feels heavier. When detectives press him, the rancher admits one thing that bothers him. The shots didn't sound close. They seemed to come from deep inside the park, far from any road, far from where hunters could easily go. It's a small detail, but it sticks. If those were the 6 shots from the ranger's gun, then somewhere in that vast, unmarked wilderness is the place where he stood, the last place he was alive. A retired schoolteacher living on the edge of the park remembers something odd that night. Around dusk, she saw 2 dark SUVs barreling down an unpaved service road. No license plates, no park decals, no headlights, just dust clouds chasing the fading sun. She thought at first they were law enforcement, maybe border patrol or park police, but the vehicles had no markings and the way they moved felt wrong, aggressive, purposeful. They didn't slow for washouts or sharp bends. They just kept going deeper into the backcountry, toward an area where there were no public roads. An hour later, she heard the faint crack of gunfire, carried on the wind. By the time she stepped outside, the desert was still again. When investigators later asked if she was certain about the missing plates, she didn't hesitate. Positive. They were meant to be untraceable. The clues start to form a jagged outline. The unmarked SUVs, the frantic radio call from the ranger, the cluster of bullets fired with no casings left behind. Investigators now believe he may have been tracking suspicious activity in a remote canyon, a known drug route, long before the park's visitors ever arrived. Maybe he spotted the vehicles parked deep in the shadows. Maybe he saw the men unloading something they didn't want seen. What happened next is lost to the desert wind. But the theory goes like this. He approaches, identifies himself, and orders them to stop. They refuse. Voices rise. A sudden movement forces his hand. He fires once, twice, again, until all 6 chambers are empty. In the tight canyon walls, the blasts would have been deafening. Then silence. Somehow the men overpower him. His revolver is left behind, but the rest, the casings, the body, the truth, vanish into the darkness. The lead investigator sits at a table covered in photos, maps, and notes. Every detail is laid out in order. First, the ranger's final radio call, short, tense, cut off mid-sentence. Then 2 years of silence. Then, the hiker's discovery of his revolver in the canyon. They pin the witness statements to the board. The schoolteacher's account of unmarked SUVs, the rancher's claim of hearing gunshots, the locals describing lights moving through the desert at night. Piece by piece, the map comes to life. The unmarked vehicles were headed in the same direction as the canyon where the gun was found. The shots the rancher heard came from that same direction. The revolver had all 6 bullets fired. No casings, no body, no signs of an animal attack. Everything points to one location and one theory: the canyon confrontation. From the moment he left his truck to the second the last bullet left the chamber, the gaps in the timeline all lead to the same place. The question isn't where it happened anymore. It's why no one found him afterward, and who made sure of that. After weeks of re-examining the evidence, the investigators settle on what they call the most likely scenario. The ranger was following up on his suspicion of an old smuggling route. The hidden trail wound through isolated canyons, perfect for moving people or cargo without being seen. They believe the unmarked SUVs spotted by the schoolteacher belonged to the smugglers. The ranger may have tracked them from a distance, moving on foot so he wouldn't be heard. When he finally confronted them, they were deep inside the park, far from any help. The smugglers were likely armed. The meeting wasn't a conversation, it was a standoff. Maybe he ordered them to drop their weapons. Maybe they warned him to back off. We don't know the words, but we know the ending. 6 rounds fired, no survivors on his side. Smugglers working this deep in the park would know how to cover their tracks. Removing the body, the casings, any sign of the fight, that would have been second nature. It's a theory that fits every clue, but it's also one no one wanted to believe. Because if it's true, it means his death wasn't an accident. It was an execution. The revolver's condition told part of the story. The sand and weathering showed it had been there for years. But the real clue was inside, an empty cylinder. He fired every single round. In training, rangers are taught to fire only if there's no other choice. 6 shots meant he was in a fight for his life. The sound of gunfire in the desert carries for miles. The rancher's memory of those distant cracks now takes on a chilling weight. Investigators imagine the scene. The ranger in the open canyon, rocks on either side, nowhere to hide. Figures in the shadows ahead of him. The smell of dust and gunpowder in the air. Shots ring out, echoing against the canyon walls. He fires again and again, trying to hold them off. Then silence. When the echoes die, so does the trail of evidence. No bullet fragments, no footprints, no drag marks. The desert is loud in moments like that, and then it's as if nothing happened. All that's left is an empty gun, lying half buried in the sand, and questions that may never be answered. One fact keeps coming up: he was alone. Without backup, any fight in that terrain was a death sentence. Once the 6 shots were gone, there was nothing left to hold them back. If the smugglers outnumbered him, and they almost certainly did, they could have surrounded him in seconds. The rest would have been quick, brutal, final. And then came the cleanup. These were people who lived in the shadows. They would have known how to disappear. The body could be hidden in a mine shaft, buried in a dry wash, or taken across the border before sunrise. The revolver might have been dropped by accident or maybe left as a warning. Either way, nothing else remained. No radio, no gear, no tracks. The investigators realized something else. Whoever did this wasn't worried about being found. That's why the case feels like a wall. The suspects are ghosts, the scene is gone, and the desert, vast, unchanging, swallows the rest. Even with all the pieces, the official file still reads the same word: unsolved. The canyon confrontation theory is strong. The timeline matches. The witnesses' stories fit. The evidence, what little there is, lines up. But without a body, the law calls it speculation. For the family, it feels like an insult. For his fellow rangers, it's a wound that never heals. They still pass the spot where his truck was found. They still glance at the canyons where his voice was last heard on the radio. The Park Service can't close the file, but they can't keep it open forever either. Resources run out. Leads dry up. The desert wins again. To the public, it's just another missing person case. But to the people who knew him, it's something else entirely. A reminder that sometimes, in the most remote corners of the country, justice never even gets the chance to start.